It's a little hard for me to do that these days because I'm pretty solid. Mick Mars, the guitarist who helped define the raw energy and iconic sound of Mötley Crüe, has always been the quiet force behind the band's legendary success. With his blistering riffs, unforgettable solos, and unmatched endurance, Mars became the heart and soul of the Crue's music. But now, at age 73, Mars is finally breaking his silence about the band's troubled journey, revealing the ugly truths that fans never knew about. What caused the band's foundation to fail, and how did these dark secrets change the Mötley Crüe sound? Born Robert Allen Deal on May 4, 1951, in Terrett, Indiana, Mick came from a poor family. When he was a child, his family moved to Garden Grove, California, in the hopes of a better life, but it wasn't an easy road for young Mick. His problems started early and would continue to shape his future. When he was 14, Mick started having severe back pain that would last the rest of his life. He was later diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, a form of arthritis that causes the spine. As a teenager, Mick was already a musician at heart, but his physical limitations became clear. Even though the pain made it hard for him to stand, he found comfort in music, something that gave him meaning in the midst of his daily battles with his body. By the time Mick was in his late teens, he was already deeply involved in music. He spent hours learning to play guitar, drawing inspiration from musicians like Elvis Presley and surf rock star Dick Dale. At age 18, Mick hurt his hand at work, which almost ended his music career before it even started, but Mick was determined. He quit his job at a factory and decided to pursue music full-time, even if it meant going through hard times. His love of the guitar and his dream of becoming a rock musician drove him forward. He joined a number of local bands that played in small clubs and bars around Southern California. Whitehorse was one of the most notable of these early bands, and they helped Mick become known in the underground rock scene. During this time, Mick's reputation as a skilled guitarist with an emotionally charged playing style began to grow. His raw energy and ability to command a guitar earned him respect, but he didn't have much success in the music business. Mick knew he didn't want to just follow trends, he wanted to make something that was truly his own. In 1980, Mick took a big step. He changed his name to Mick Mars, letting go of his old identity and embracing a new one. With his new name, Mick put an ad in the local paper calling for musicians. Despite everything that life had thrown at him, Mick had found his place in the world of rock and wasn't going to let anything stop him. When I was a kid, I knew I was going to be a musician, but when I saw a lot of old people on there, Theater of Pain, 1985, Girls, 1987, and Dr. Feelgood, 1989, all cemented Mötley Crüe as one of the biggest rock bands of all time. The mix playing on these albums was more refined, but it still had the same raw energy that had defined their earlier work. I went to rehab, I left rehab, I went back, I got on drugs, I did some just cold turkey stuff that would last a couple weeks, but it was about 20 years ago, I had a really bad overdose, I ended up in the hospital, and I came out shot up again, he said. I overdosed again, and when I woke up the next morning, the light had gone out, and it was over. I never picked up Home Sweet It Again, a song from Theater of Pain, where Mick's guitar playing was at its most delicate and the melody was a contrast to the band's usual heavier sound. But even in the quieter moments, Mick's ability to evoke emotion through his guitar was clear. However, as the years went on, Mick started to feel like an outsider in the band while Mötley continued to break new ground and make headlines, and Mick's personal problems got worse, his health was getting worse, and he often found himself in pain after. Mick couldn't keep up with the high-energy lifestyle that the rest of the band lived. He was also becoming more emotionally and physically alone because of his illness. His quieter, more reserved personality made him stand out from his bandmates, who were the public faces of Mötley Crüe's notorious image. Mick wasn't one to seek attention, but that didn't mean he wasn't affected by the growing distance between him and the rest of the band. By the time Dr. Feelgood came out, Mick was facing another challenge. His place in the band was becoming less clear, even though his guitar playing was still an important part of the band's sound. Vince, Nicky, and Tommy had become the faces of the band, while Mick was more of a silent partner who was often overshadowed by his more outgoing bandmates. This wasn't a reflection of his talent. Mick Mars was an important part of Mötley Crüe's success, but his hectic lifestyle and personal problems had made him less visible, and Mick was no longer the center of attention. Despite all of this, Mick's dedication to his music never wavered. He continued to play with passion even when his body hurt him, and his guitar riffs were as powerful and impactful as ever. Behind the scenes, Mick was struggling in ways that not many people knew about. He was often in unbearable physical and emotional pain, but Mick Mars stayed committed to Mötley Crüe even as his personal problems got worse. His strength and unwavering dedication to his craft made him one of the most underrated and respected guitarists in rock history. As Mötley Crüe's career reached new heights, Mick's problems continued, but even as his health got worse, he never stopped playing and never stopped contributing to the band's success. His journey was one of personal pain and sacrifice, but it was also one. Mick Mars was at a crossroads after decades of performing with Mötley Crüe while dealing with severe pain from his ankylosing spondylitis and eventually leaving the band for health reasons. He hadn't taken his decision to leave the band lightly. He had been a part of Mötley Crüe since the beginning and for over 40 years had been the driving force behind the band's iconic sound. His guitar riffs, which were often dark and haunting, were the foundation of the band's music, so leaving the stage was not only a matter of physical necessity but also an emotional one. But Mick, the silent warrior of rock, wasn't going to let the. After a lot of internal and external pressure, Mick made the hard decision to stop touring with Mötley Crüe in 2022. He said he wasn't leaving the band completely, but his health was getting worse, and he couldn't handle the physical demands of a rock tour anymore. In what seemed like the final blow to his legacy, Mötley Crüe quickly announced that guitarist John Five would take his place. The cold, businesslike announcement felt like a slap in the face to Mick, who had worked so hard for the band. He had devoted his whole life to the band, and his sudden departure felt more like erasing his place in the history of the band than a well-deserved retirement. But Mick Mars wasn't done by any means. After years of performing in the shadow of Mötley Crüe's outrageous antics, Mick was now in charge of his own story. His health may have kept him off the road, but his creative spirit was still alive and well, and he started working on what would become his first solo album. It was time for him to step out of the shadows and into the light, and Mick Mars was ready to tell his story on his own terms, without the band's constraints. The process of recording Mick's solo album was unlike anything he had ever done before. For the first time in his career, he wasn't worried about living up to the Mötley Crüe brand. He wasn't worried about the chaos of being on tour, the public image of the band, or the relationship with his bandmates. This was Mick Mars as a musician and artist, and he could now explore the depths of his creativity without any limits. The other side of Mars would be a deeply personal project that reflected not only his musical influences but also his life experiences. It was Mick Mars' chance to say what he really thought. Mick wanted to get away from the Mötley Crüe image and start a new musical journey. The Other Side of Mars came out in 2024 and surprised both fans and reviewers. It was honest, emotional, and unpolished, and it was a true reflection of Mick's identity as an artist. Mick Mars proved that his love for music and his dedication to Mötley Crüe could never be broken. Tensions within Mötley Crüe became more obvious as the years went by, and with each new album, the problems within the band became more obvious. Their huge success in the 1980s had brought them fame and wealth, but it had also caused disagreements among the members behind the scenes. What seemed to be the ultimate rock and roll success story was falling apart piece by piece. Mick Mars, the guitarist who had been with the band from the start, was no longer feeling the band. The same sense of camaraderie with his bandmates, and the relationships between them were starting to show signs of weariness. The band had always been known for its wild behavior, drug use, parties, and the kind of chaos that comes with living fast and dying young. But what had started as a shared bond over rebellion and rock music eventually gave way to egos, exhaustion, and growing personal differences. For Mick, being in Mötley Crüe wasn't just about the highs of fame and success, it was also about dealing with pain physically and emotionally every day. His battle with ankylosing spondylitis, a disease that causes the spine to fuse, had only made things worse. Mick's health was slowly getting worse over the years, while the rest of the band seemed to enjoy the fast-paced lifestyle. This made things harder for him both physically and mentally. The first big sign of tension was when Mick's health started to affect his ability to tour. While the rest of the band was enjoying the fruits of their labor on world tours, Mick was finding it harder and harder to keep up. The pain was becoming unbearable, but Mick didn't want to let his bandmates know how bad it was for him physically. He didn't want to complain about how it was affecting him. Because of the constant pain in his back and joints, he had to rethink his future in the band. This made things more difficult between him and his bandmates, especially Tommy Lee and Vince Neil, who were big into the band's high-octane party lifestyle. In interviews and behind closed doors, Mick started to feel left behind while Nicky's excess charm and Tommy Lee's crazy personality kept them in the public eye. Mick wasn't someone who liked being the center of attention. He was always focused on the music, and his guitar playing was the sound they were known for, but he didn't think he was getting the credit he deserved for what he did. Things got worse when Mick's health got worse in the mid-1990s. After years of intense touring and recording, Mick's body was no longer able to handle the physical demands of the lifestyle. His pain was unbearable at times, and he had to take more and more time off. This wasn't what Mick wanted to do, but he had no choice. As the band moved into the 1990s and a new era of music, their sound started to change, and Mick found himself less and less important. Vince, Nicky, and Tommy became the faces of Mötley Crüe and Mick Crüe. After decades of playing with the band, Mick decided it was time for him to take a break from the road. In 2022, Mick Mars retired from touring with Mötley Crüe, citing ongoing health problems. While this seemed like the right thing to do for Mick, it quickly turned into a public battle when the band announced that Mick was leaving and would be replaced by guitarist John Five. There was no discussion or negotiation, just a cold announcement, and Mick Mars felt betrayed. The band's management made it clear that Mick's departure was due to his health problems. Mick said that Nicky, Vince, and Tommy had tried to get rid of him by taking over the band's finances and forcing him to sell his 25% share in the company for a small fraction of what it was worth. The legal battle was heated, with Mick accusing the band of stealing from him for years. The Mick's lawsuit also revealed some shocking facts, such as claims that Nicky Six hadn't been playing bass live during the band's tours and that Vince's vocals and Tommy's drums relied heavily on backing tracks. Mick's accusations shocked the music world for years. Fans thought that the chaos and the rock and roll lifestyle were. Mick's lawsuit, on the other hand, painted a very different picture. He said that the people he had once called his brothers were now trying to erase him from the band's history, taking away his legacy and the respect he deserved. The legal documents showed a side of the band that fans never expected to see, a side of betrayal and manipulation. Despite the backlash from the public, Mick stood his ground. He wasn't just fighting for money, he was fighting for respect. His music and guitar had been the heartbeat of Mötley Crüe for decades, and he had given up his health, body, and personal life for the band. Mick wasn't going to let being ignored like a forgotten relic of the past happen without a fight. The legal battles went on, but Mick made it clear that he was determined to get what was rightfully his. The situation became a turning point in Mick's life and career. He wasn't going to stand for being pushed to the sidelines any longer. He found the strength to fight back. His legal battle wasn't just a fight for money, it was a fight for respect and recognition of his huge contribution to Mötley Crüe's success. Mick Mars, the guitarist who helped create the sound that defined a generation, was. Mick Mars refused to give up on his craft, even though his health was getting worse and his relationships with his bandmates were getting tense. He wasn't going to let the problems he was having in the band stop him from continuing his journey as a musician. His desire to play, create, and express himself was stronger than any problem, and no one could take that away from him. Mars had built a legacy that would live on no matter how hard the band tried to erase it. I was like, what's Grandpa doing there? But that's kind of the vibe of bands from the 1980s, 1990s, 1970s, and 1960s, like the Stones. You don't really think about that because most of your fans grew up with you. Mick Mars' rise to fame with Mötley Crüe wasn't a smooth and easy path, but it was one of huge musical impact and personal struggle. When Mötley Crüe formed in 1981, they were like any other rock band trying to find their place in the crowded Los Angeles music scene. What made them stand out was their raw energy and rebellious spirit. Mick's playing, especially Mick Mars' undeniable guitar talent from the start, was the foundation of the band's sound and a key part of what made them who they were. The band's debut album, Too Fast for Love, released in 1981, told the world exactly what Mötley Crüe was about. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a statement. The album was loud, rebellious, and raw, with Mick's distinctive guitar riffs that set the tone for what was to come. The opening track, Live Wire, was a great example of Mick's aggressive yet melodic playing, blending heavy distortion with precise note choices, showing that his guitar was more than just an instrument. It became an important part of the band's sound and the basis for their wild and untamed performances. But behind the scenes, things weren't always easy for Mick. He was dealing with the stresses of the music business as well as the constant pain from his illness, ankylosing spondylitis, which caused inflammation and fusion of the spine, making every movement painful. On stage, Mick often looked like he was in agony, but he never let it show. He played some of the most famous riffs in rock history for hours at a time, even though it hurt. As Mötley Crüe's popularity grew in the early 1980s, Mick's contributions to the band's sound became even more clear with the release of Shout at the Devil in 1983. This album was darker, heavier, and more polished than their debut, and Mick's guitar playing was at the forefront. Songs like Looks That Kill and Too Young to Fall in Love became instant classics, with mixed guitar riffs adding a raw edge that was all his own. His ability to make powerful, memorable guitar parts became a trademark of the Mötley Crüe sound, and it was. Even though the band was becoming more popular, Mick was still having personal problems. His disease was making it harder for him to move, and the long hours on the road, strict schedules, and notoriously hard life of the band made things even worse. While his bandmates Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil were often caught up in the wild partying culture of the 1980s rock scene, Mick chose to stay more private. He didn't get involved in the media scandals or drugs and alcohol that affected his bandmates. Instead, he focused on his guitar and his music, using it as both a form of